This man came up and put his hand on my son's shoulders and said, "I don't have a problem with you." My son looked up at him and said, "I know, but these are all my friends." He turned around, walked away from the table, turned around, and my son got shot first in the heart.
Welcome to Live Life Video. Have you ever thought about what you would do if somebody did something horrible to you or somebody you love, like shoot your kid? Could you forgive? How would your life be different after that?
We have a very powerful story today of a woman who really did just that. She was able to work through her grief and forgive the person who killed her child. Kevin, I was so moved by this interview with Suzie Mack, and still am a bit in awe of this woman and her story.
Yeah, and just editing this, just watching it, it was just, I think the most incredible thing is this woman just started and just went straight through this whole story. And it is probably, of all the videos that we've done with grief, she is probably one of the most articulate people that we've had, just outlining it. Not a therapist, but a very, high-functioning woman who in society has it all together, apparently. Society would look, but it's like something devastating like that. But I think for me, this story is so powerful in how she handled it, but that there is life after trauma and loss.
Yeah, and what was so moving to me, and I believe what will be moving to you, is you can tell that her pain is so true and authentic. She's very genuine in everything she says and draws you into this powerful story.
10 years ago, in October of this year, my son will have been murdered. And he was a student at IU, a senior in journalism, came home for a weekend, and this tragedy happened.
What did your son want to do?
He was wonderful at writing songs and writing poems. His ultimate goal was to travel the world, write for something like National Geographic, but he also wanted to open a restaurant on a beach in Florida with his friends. That was kind of his ultimate dream.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. All right, Suzie, just kind of set the stage and tell me what was going on in your life and your family before this event happened.
Mm-hmm. I came from a Christian home, had awesome parents who taught us, obviously, about Jesus at a very young age. Lived a great life. You always knew your parents loved you. Never had anything as a child that was hard. If there were hard things, us kids didn't know about it. And so my dream in life was always to have children. I could picture myself in a big house with a picket fence, sitting on the porch, and always pregnant with children. Life didn't wind up like that, but he did bless me with two wonderful children. My daughter, his name's Kayla, and then I had my son Jimmy. And we had a happy life. The kids were in all the sports. We did everything. In the year 2001, it was a tough year. I found out my husband had an affair, and in 2001, we went through a divorce. My daughter was leaving for college, which is hard for any mother when she's going out of state. And then my son had a terrible car accident, and 4 children should have died that night. But by the grace of God, all 4 children lived. My son was able to save 2 of the other kids' lives because the car exploded. He was able to get him out. And I got a divorce. My daughter left for college. My son was in rec, and I got sued for $1.8 million, all in a 4-month period. And you talk about a rough year. I can remember during that time telling myself, I can't wait till this year is over, because it can't get any worse than this. It just cannot get any worse than this. Well, my daughter, she was in college at Wisconsin. My son was a student at IU. And her senior year at the University of Wisconsin, we were almost time to graduate, and there was a period where I called my daughter and I knew that she was mad at me, just mad, and I couldn't figure it out. We talk all the time. Both of my children, we had a great relationship. And finally I said, you got to tell me what's the matter. And she shared with me, it's 2 weeks before graduation, or before finals. She shared with me that she had been attacked by a man. And this had happened like a week earlier and she hadn't told me. So instantly the motherness in yourself wants to run and take care of her, but she told me I couldn't come because she had to study for finals. So she was also going to leave for law school. So the day I went to Wisconsin to pick her up, I had a U-Haul to go get her. And when we were coming home, I had a U-Haul loaded to take her to Loyola at New Orleans the next day. So when I picked her up, it was so sad because, you know, every year you pick your kids up, they're packed, you take your time loading the U-Haul, you go home. This year it was, she had all of her friends there, they were all dressed like boys, had their hair up because they were afraid. We had that van, or that U-Haul loaded so fast that we left and we didn't go back. And that was a really ordeal for her. And I thank the good Lord there was a young man that actually saved her life, where I probably wouldn't have my daughter today. So I brought her home, loaded everything up that she could possibly take, because she didn't know anybody in New Orleans. And I wanted it to be like home after the situation she just went through. That's what I felt I needed to do. So little did we know that was in 2005. We go down, we spend a lot of money, we get her apartment set up. My mom had rode with me. Neither one of us felt great about this move and being in New Orleans and leaving her there. But we did. And they talked about Katrina. About 6 days after we arrived, Katrina hit. And she had to leave instantly. At first it was not a mandatory evacuation, it was just voluntary, and then it became mandatory, and the next thing you know, everybody is leaving in a hurry. Nobody knows where they're going. There's not enough gas. She doesn't have money. That's a whole nother ordeal in itself. But there was a 12-hour period when Katrina hit that her phone had died. She didn't have money, didn't have gas, and I had not a clue where my daughter was. Wow. For 12 hours. And the only thing you can do is pray. So in a short period of time, divorce, daughter left for college, son had a wreck, sued for $1.8 million, daughter attacked, Katrina hit. And I'm like, surely, Lord, there can't be any more that's added to my life. And I've learned to never say that. Because you don't know from one day to the next, 1 minute to the next, what's going to happen. So, move up just a little bit. My daughter's in now, because of the hurricane, Kayla ended up at law school in Texas. Jimmy's still a senior at IU. And my daughter had met a wonderful man from Texas. So she had asked me if I would bring my mother and father and meet them in Memphis. And that's when they were going to tell my parents that they were going to get married, and we went to find a wedding chapel. And so we had asked my son to go, and my mom especially had asked him multiple times, Jimmy, why don't you go with us? Well, what 22-year-old kid wants to go look for a wedding chapel? So we started out and we left that evening, and my dad was driving, and I called Jimmy. And generally when you have a conversation with a college kid, it's, are you studying enough? Are your grades up? You're spending way too much money on this? You know, wanting to know as a parent where they're at and what they're doing the right thing. This conversation was nothing like that. He said, Mom, I'm coming home tonight. And I'm going, no, don't come home. I'm not going to be here. And he said, Mom, I have to come home. And he told me that this gentleman that he knew on his last birthday had given him a gift. And this man is ill, and they're having a party, and they invited him to come. And I remember on Jimmy's birthday, I was washing dishes at the sink, and Jimmy walks up to me, and I cannot for the life of me remember what this item is. I know that it was leather. Jimmy held it out in front of me and said, Mom, can you believe he bought me this on my birthday? Jimmy was just so surprised that this man bought whatever this was. And so he said, Mom, I have to go home. He goes, but I promise you, I'll come home and see you next week. So I didn't ask him about grades. I didn't ask him about money. We talked for probably a half hour. And the last thing we said, as we always do, is, son, I love you. And it's, I love you, Mom. Little did I know that would be the last time I would hear that. So we get to Memphis. We get to the hotel. My son and her now husband arrived, and we went out to dinner. Sorry, I'm gonna cry.
It's okay.
We went to dinner and then we went to bed. We had adjoining rooms. My parents were in their room. And at 5 in the morning, I get a phone call from one of my son's best friends. Actually, one of the friends that were in the car accident that should have passed away too. And he's weeping. And he's saying, "Mama, it's bad." And I'm trying to wake up. And I'm going, "Corey?" And he can't say anything, but the only thing, "Mama, it's bad." And I'm going, "What's bad? Is somebody hurt?" And he just said, "Mom, it's really bad." And I said, "Was Jimmy in an accident?" And he just kept crying, saying, "Mom, it's bad." And I said, "Is my son dead?" And he said, "Yes." So instantly I dropped the phone. My daughter jumped out of bed. I immediately walked over to my parents' room. I was in shock. I remember opening the door. It said, "Jimmy's dead." I was weeping uncontrollably. I remember my father getting out of bed in his underwear, coming over to me, caressing my face, telling me I need to sit down. And I need to settle down because I was going to have a heart attack. I remember my daughter screaming at people because people in the hotel were yelling at us for being loud. I remember my parents having to bathe me. I couldn't do anything. They almost had to carry me out of the hotel. We had the long drive back from Memphis to Marion. We had multiple vehicles. Luckily, my son-in-law now was there. He drove home.
Do you remember anything about that trip?
The only thing I can tell you is I sang the entire way home. We did not speak. We didn't stop to eat. We only stopped for a drink and gas. And I sang one verse over and over, and it's, "I know that my Redeemer lives." Why I sang that, I have no idea. But I belted it out the entire way home. I'm surprised everybody didn't ask me to be quiet, but they didn't. When we got home, there were so many people in my house. I don't know how they got in there, but they were in my house. I walked directly to my son's bedroom. Jimmy was a neat freak. Everything had a place. There was his suitcase laying on the bed, and I laid on his bed, and I held that suitcase tight because I knew it was the last thing that he had touched. I cried. I remember people. I lost so much time. I remember them calling the doctor to get me medicine. I remember my pastor, my aunts and uncles. I remember everybody coming in and praying, and I didn't care that any of them were there. The only thing I wanted to do was be as close to Jimmy as I could. There were so many kids there, and my father kept coming in and saying, "You need to talk to these kids. They're waiting on you to talk to them." It took me several hours before I got off that bed. I remember them all standing around. Nobody knew what to do. Jimmy was a small build guy. He had a personality that when he walked into a room, everybody gravitated towards him. And when you look at pictures, he always has his arms wide open to give everybody a hug. Some of his friends have told me that he was like a mood changer when he walked in. You know, he just changed the presence in the room, and that's true. He always fought for the underdog. Just a great kid. Curly red hair, blue eyes, freckles, light-skinned. Just a joy to be with. I remember going out and talking to the kids. I don't remember much of it. I remember them praying, going around the room praying. They're lost because Jimmy was one of the kids that kept their group together. It's kind of a blur after that. Everybody left. I remember the doctor, they had got the medicine, which helped put me to sleep. Got up the next morning at 6 o'clock in the morning. I have TV anchors at my front door wanting to talk to me. And there was no way. I couldn't do that. I still couldn't believe that Jimmy was gone.
Did you know details at that time of what
We
had
knew
happened?
nothing, not one thing.
Just that he had died.
The coroner had called me probably 3 hours after I was informed by Jimmy's friend. They didn't tell me anything. They just told us that we were to report to the police station the next morning. So when we got to the police station the next morning, a lot of people have asked me, don't you want to kill him? I didn't even know who he was. I just couldn't understand, where was my son? What happened to my son? My brain never went to the killer. I wanted to know who he was.
Did you know he had been murdered at that point?
I knew he had been murdered, but that's all I knew. I just knew he was dead. Didn't really know any details until we went to the police station, and they were very limited at what they would tell us because there was still an investigation going on. And you are just in shock. You are 100% numb. No feeling. There's no purpose at that very moment. You are just in limbo. Your world has been taken out from under you. Everything you know to be true is not true. Every single aspect of your life is different from that second on. Everything you knew to be normal is not normal. I remember that we met there, and there was another family, their son was shot 8 times. And they were there, and I really didn't know them very well. You know, the coroner, the police detectives, everybody's there. They tell you very little information, and then you're left to leave.
What did they tell you? Anything?
All they told us that there had been a confrontation. There was a restaurant bar in our community it was the place to go and eat lunch during the day. It was the place to go. It was the hangout. It's where all the college kids went when they came home. And all they told us is that there was a man named Dennis Roberson, and that he shot my son, and he shot Judd. Didn't go into much detail. I think they were still trying to sort out who did what. Just that they had him in custody, and they knew that he was the one that did it. So I had immediately asked if I could see my son, because you as a mom, until you see your child, you don't believe that it's really happened. And we had to wait a day, if I remember right. And when I got to the funeral home, they had to do autopsies. So you know they cut your kid's eyes in half. They've got the big V across his chest. You go in, and there he's laying on the coldest table in the world. All I wanted him to do was to get up and say, "Mom, I love you." And he couldn't do it. I kept saying, "Get up, Jimmy, just get up." Couldn't do it. So, after being there for a while, my parents and my daughter, Jimmy's dad went. And when we were done, I used to go and eat lunch every Monday with my partners at this restaurant. I wanted to go see it for myself. So I walked into the restaurant with my daughter, and I asked them, "Where is it that my son was killed?" They had a rug on the carpet. Out in front of the restaurant, they had these 2 big boards where all the kids had hundreds of candles, and all of them had come to write messages. So you're preparing a funeral. You're still trying to figure out why this happened and what really happened. And then you have to go to where he is charged. So we went there. The courtroom was so full. There were so many people there they couldn't get in.
That's going on at the same time we're preparing the funeral. And that was the first time I set eyes on the man that murdered my son. Jimmy probably weighed 130 pounds. This guy weighed probably 250. You immediately looked at him and I thought, why didn't you just hit the kids? You could have taken him out with one hit. You know, why did you have to get a gun? But I had no idea what had happened at that point. I set eyes on him and I just wanted to ask him why. Just why? So from there, we went to the funeral home. Came the time of the funeral. Jimmy died on the 27th of October. He was buried on Halloween. Don't like that holiday ever. But there were 12 to 1,400 people that came to that funeral. The funeral home owner was so afraid that the community would think that the place was too small because there were so many people outside. They weaved them in and out of the pews at the chapel. It was taking people 6 and 7 hours to get through the line. And the one thing that I did was everybody that I knew was a prayer warrior, I asked them. You know, as a mom, you know you teach your kids right. But as a mom, I needed to know that God had my son. So every one of them, I said, I need you to pray that God confirms with me that he has Jimmy. I had people, you know, come up to me and say, you need to try to speed this up. I couldn't speed it up. These kids were hurting. And I was going to take every single minute they needed. It didn't matter if people couldn't wait in line, they couldn't wait. They just had to do what they had to do, and we had to do what we did. We got through that night, and I don't know how we got through it, honestly. Next day was the funeral. And that morning in the church, Jimmy's body was in the front of the church. And there were people that stood up that had given their lives to Christ in that 3 or 4 days. And ultimately, you know, in God's eyes, if one person came to Christ through the death of my son, in his eyes, it's worth it. It doesn't make it any easier for me. But with God, time is nothing. It's not the same for us. I remember thanking everybody for coming. Jimmy would have been in awe at how many people were there. He would not have believed how many people came. So what happens is you have your funeral, and the people go back to their lives. You need them to go back to their lives, but they go back, and all of a sudden you realize, I'm by myself. My life has changed and nobody even cares. That's how you begin to feel. The alone, the feeling of the loneliness that you have is incredible. It's indescribable. I'm very fortunate that I have strong Christian parents that were there for me. If I didn't believe in Jesus, I honestly don't think I would be here today. The only way I got through this is by the grace of God. Everybody goes home, and I had this great need to keep my son alive. So I wore his shoes for over a year. Didn't take them off. I might be dressed up, but I'd have his shoes on. I would go to the cemetery almost every night, sometimes in the middle of the night. Not a safe thing to do, but I did it. And I would lay on the grass. Right above him, because I felt closest to him. I would be there for hours. I wouldn't tell anybody I was there. My parents would have had a fit if they knew I was in the graveyard at midnight. I would wake up and have rashes from pesticides, but I care. I still care. I'm part owner of a real estate company. So I would tell myself, you need to go to work. You got to get up. Everybody always says, get up and go. Get up and keep moving. Well, my daughter was in law school. She wanted to quit and stay home and take care of me. I would try to go to work for a couple days. I wasn't any good to anybody. I'd show up, 10 minutes later I'd leave. I lost so much time during that year that I can't account for.
You just don't remember it, do you?
You can't.
Grief does that.
You're lost. You're just totally lost. But my daughter wanted to quit, and I said, you're not quitting. So about a week and a half after Jimmy died, maybe 2 weeks, I loaded up the car, and I can remember my mom not wanting me to go, but I drove my daughter back to Texas. Had no business driving across the country, but I did it. And I actually went to law school. I was so far over my head, but I would go sit in classes because I did not want her to quit. Finally, she said, Mom, if you want me to do this, you have to go home. So I said, okay. So I went home. Got speeding tickets on the way home. I would try to talk my way out of it because I was bawling and tell them what happened. They didn't speak English, so that didn't help me. I made it home. I don't know how.
Grace of God.
Don't even remember the crossing state lines or anything. I know that God is the reason I made it. And I went back to work. When you sell houses, you deal with a lot of money for people. I probably was in no position to really be doing that, but I would go every day. And you know what I experienced is I couldn't handle people. I could handle you one-on-one. I couldn't handle a group. And you get to the point, you'll see people you know, and being in real estate, I'm very well known in our community. Everybody knows who I am. You would see them and you could see people try to turn down a different aisle. They didn't know what to say to you. You would get to feel like, well, I cannot believe you said you didn't say something to me. You saw me and you didn't say something. But if they did say something, then my brain would go to, how dare you say something to me? Nobody could win even if they wanted to. I was never mean, but my inner thoughts were not good when it came to people. I didn't go to my church for a year because I didn't want to face all of them. I couldn't face all of them. I just couldn't handle too many people at one time. I would do better if I would go to a church I didn't know. I'd walk in late and I'd leave early. Nobody could ever say anything to me. While I'm going through this process, we're starting to go through the trial now. Not the trial, the proceedings up to.
When did you start to get some details? When did you start to find out what actually happened?
Well, actually, after Jimmy's funeral, they gave us a little bit more information, but I was to the point I couldn't wait on him. I wanted to know what happened. Well, I knew a lot of Jimmy's friends that were there when it happened, so I have a binder at home this thick. I did my own interviews. I would call them one by one to come to my house because I wanted to know what really happened. Jimmy had never been in trouble. He was a great kid. He would never fight.
You needed to make sense of that because it wasn't making sense.
It made no sense. And everybody's, when I interviewed them, it all came to the same conclusion. They went to the bar. They got there about 10 o'clock at night. This other gentleman, there were two of them sitting on one side of the bar. There was some conversation going back and forth about one of Jimmy's friends, this person that had been drinking, thought he was somebody else. They had got out driver's license. They had tried to prove that it wasn't him, but it kept going back and forth. The next thing that happened is one of the young kids, his parents evidently have a large gun collection. And this gentleman, one had been in the service and one of the fathers had been in the service. So this side of the bar was talking about how many people their parents had killed in the service, how many guns they had, and then this side got tired of going back and forth, so one of the kids started talking about how big of guns they had. The bar had closed. the man that killed my son, his wife worked there. She had been my waitress many, many, many times. And it kept going, and these kids would go to this bar, and there would be a group of them. When it closed, their friends worked there. They'd help them clean up. They would help do everything, and they'd just stand and chat. And this gentleman told his wife, who worked there, that he was going to go buy cigarettes. He left the bar, drove across town, got 2 guns, came back to the bar. There's a Burger King next door that has it on video. He got out of his car, came to the door, knocked on the door, wanted to come in. His wife saw the big gun, told him to go put it back in his truck. She did not know that he had one in his pants behind him under his coat. So from there, I don't know how much longer of process it was, but at one point this man came up and put his hand on my son's shoulders and said, "I don't have a problem with you." My son looked up at him and said, "I know, but these are all my friends." He turned around, walked away from the table, turned around, and my son got shot first in the heart. Jimmy took 4 bullets, one in the heart, one in the leg, one in the arm, and his cell phone got one into his rear. And the other young man got 8 bullets, mostly to this area here, injured very, very badly. They caught him immediately because everybody knew. They were able to identify him. His wife worked there. The police got him on the phone, talked him to coming back. They didn't realize my son had been hit, so they were working on the other young man, but nobody worked on my son. Once they realized that he was missing, they went back in and he was under a table. He had fallen. He was sitting in a sitting position when it happened and fell over and kind of slouched under a table, and they just didn't know it. So, you know, we really don't know that if they would have got to him early, if it would have helped or not. I just have to trust that this is the way the Lord wanted it to be, and if he would have wanted it any different way, it would have been that way. But you go back to now my daughter's gone. Well, everybody's life is back to normal. I don't know what normal is anymore. I just have no idea. And I was showing a lady houses one day, and I had asked God for confirmation. Well, I didn't know this lady from Adam. They were going to move here from another city. And she just started telling me about a problem that her son had. And I thought, I cannot believe you're telling me that your son has this problem. You know, you don't know me. How can you tell me this? And I was also at the same time thinking, Lord, I wouldn't know what to say to her, you know, but he allowed her to be there in front of me. I would show her houses 3 or 4 times, and every single time she brought this problem up, which I as a mom would have been terribly embarrassed over and never would have mentioned it to anybody. Finally, they asked me to come to their house and see their house because we couldn't find what they wanted. So this particular day, it was about a month and a half after Jimmy died, maybe 2 months. I'm driving to their city, and a friend of mine had given me 5 CDs that she had made me with music on them. Christian music she thought would help me. Well, my son loved music. And I, to this day, 10 years later, have to be very careful what music I listen to, because if I hear a song that he played, it still continues 10 years later to take me to a rough place. This journey is not over. So I had them in the 5-disc CD changer, but I had not played them. This lady's husband was an attorney, so I was preparing. I had never met him. I was trying to prepare everything that I might say in my mind in that 30-minute drive. So I wasn't thinking about my son at that moment. I was literally just thinking about, what do I want to say? I want to look professional. I want to, do everything right. I get there, and the first person that I get to meet is his son. And I can remember shaking his hand. And then they sent the kids away. We looked at their house. We sat down and had lunch or dinner. And all of a sudden, now this wife brings up the problem in front of her husband, and I have a bite of spaghetti in my mouth. And it kept getting bigger and bigger, and I am praying, Lord, I have no idea what to say to these people. You have to help me, number 1, get this bite of spaghetti down. And number 2, you got to tell me what to say to these people, because I have not a clue. I mean, and they're talking about a problem, and I just lost my son. And I opened my mouth when I got the bite down and I said, you know, you are much better to have your son with this problem and love him through it than you are not to have him at all. They both looked at each other, and it felt like 15 minutes, but I'm sure it was a matter of seconds. And they both agreed they were right. We finished dinner, and I'm out to the car. And I know that it was before Christmas because there was Christmas lights, and they lived in a housing addition that had big houses, so everybody had beautiful lights. I was looking at the lights, but when I turned my vehicle on, those CDs were playing, and I did not turn them on. I didn't even realize it at the moment. And the song that was on, it is so simple. It just says, say the name of Jesus. Say the name of Jesus. When there's nothing else that you can say, call upon his name, say his name. Over and over. Well, there was snow on the ground, so I couldn't go real fast. As I got through that edition, by the time I got to the end, I was belting that song out. Hadn't thought of Jimmy. I was just like, oh, thank you, Lord. I have that done. Well, when you leave this town, there's this huge hill. And I'm going down that hill. And I'm about halfway down that hill, singing to the top of my lungs, and I hear Jesus say to me, I can take better care of him than you can. What a relief as a mom to have that confirmation that I prayed for, that I know Jimmy's with Jesus. I knew from that moment on he was in a better place than I could have ever offered him. I knew at that moment if he was offered the opportunity to come back, he wouldn't come back. Who would come back? None of us would. So that was a huge boost for me. And at the same time, I missed him so. I'm very, very fortunate. We talk about forgiveness. It was not hard for me. I never had to toil with forgiveness, not once. God took that from me. When anybody would ask me about what happened, my thoughts not one time went to the murder, not once. My thoughts always went to how great my son was. I sure miss him. I never allowed myself, I didn't even know that I was doing it, but I never allowed myself to go to Dennis Roberson. I just went to, I lost a great kid. He was such a good kid. I miss him so. I miss him today just like I missed him 10 years ago. I can't believe it's 10 years now. It will be at the end of this year. I did have to move. Being divorced, I was in that house. Everything was the same. Kayla was gone. Every night I went home, I would walk in his room. I knew I had to move. So I sold my house. So I had been toying with selling it, so I had it prepared. Sold fast. I bought another house, and it was a project. You know, I bought it and I moved walls and redid the whole thing, and it was a good thing for me to do because it made me focus on something else to kind of help keep me going. If I wouldn't have done that, I'm not sure. I think my progress of healing would have been worse because I needed something to keep me moving. But I just moved, and the Lord allowed me to have another dream. And in this dream, I had moved, and the front of my house was pristine. The inside of my house was pristine. But my backyard was the pits. Two men arrived at my front door, and they wanted to see some houses in the back of the addition. And I said, "Sir, it's a Sunday." I gave them my card, and I said, "You call me tomorrow, and I'll show you." Well, I looked out on the street, and all the kids were gathered there, and there was this one young man with little boy with red curly hair, who was always being traumatized by the other kids. I walked up to him and I said, "Son," I said, "would you like to come with me and I'll teach you how to avoid some of the things that happen in life?" And he said, "Yeah." So we walked through my pretty house. We get to the backyard, and I'm telling you, trash barrels, weeds, it's bad. And I said, you stand over there. And there was this huge pile of 2x4s in pieces, just chunks of them, huge. And I said, you're going to stand over there. And I haven't quite figured out what God means by this, but I know someday he'll reveal it. I told him to stand over there, and I said, I'm going to throw these pieces of boards at you, and I want you to get out of the way. Well, we got to the bottom of the pile, and I know he was grateful at that moment that he was going to get a leave. And I said, no. I said, now I'm going to stand a piece of plywood up, and now I'm going to throw things at you that you're not going to see coming. So we did this for hours. Finally, I walked over to him. I said, you're ready to go. So he said, okay, thanks. And he runs out the front door. I gradually walk through the front, the house to the front door, look out the front door, and there stands my son. And he had a shirt buttons down here and sleeves all rolled up, just like he always would, everything in place. But he's got no pants on. And I walk out, and I am so excited to see him. I am, hi, Jimmy, how are you? Are you hungry? You want to go see a movie? I hadn't seen him in months. And I'm like, he's going, no. And finally he looks at me and goes, Mom, quit looking at my junk. And I said, well, where's your pants? He goes, it doesn't matter. And I'm going, oh, okay. And he goes, Mom, follow me. So I don't know if you've ever been to Broad Ripple, Indianapolis, but it is an area where on the sidewalks there's restaurants that have tables, a lot going on. We were in an area similar to that, a lot of fun, balloons. Jimmy's walking, and the entire time I am doing nothing but talking. I am so excited to see him. And he makes a turn between two buildings, which was very narrow. And I just follow him, and we walk into this room. And there is a big boardroom table. There's no windows, with the exception of a thin layer of windows at the top. And I'm standing, leaning against the wall on one side of the room, and he's standing on the other. And I look at him and I said, son, you know that I love you. He says, I know, Mom. And you know that I love you. I said, I do. And I said, Jimmy, do you mind if I ask you some questions? He said, no. So I walked around to his end of the table. I unbuttoned his shirt, which I had seen on the autopsy table. The bullet entered by his heart. I put my finger on that spot, and I took it, and I just made a circular motion. I said, are you aware that this is the bullet that took your life? He said, I know. I said, Jimmy, did it hurt? He said, Mom, I can't remember. I took 2 steps back, and I said, Jimmy, can I ask you, what was it like the first time you saw, and I started to say Jesus, and I didn't get it out all the way. I got to G. Jimmy's knees buckled, his arms went kind of down to his sides, and he goes, I knew he had seen Christ, and that he was so in awe of seeing Jesus he couldn't speak. And I looked at him and I said, Jimmy, can you stay? He said, I can't stay. I said, even for a few minutes? And he said, I can't stay. He said, Mom, I just came to tell you that I love you. And just like that, he's gone. You try to rebuild your life. It is so hard. So very hard. I would drive to one end of our city on the main drag, and you see the funeral, the graveside where he's buried. I would drive to the other end of town, and there was the restaurant he was killed. I drive by Steak and Shake, and I think Frisco melt French fries and a strawberry Mountain Dew. It doesn't matter where you go, you remember. Life is different. You know, everybody will say to you, time. You'll heal in time. Time doesn't heal. Time gives you an opportunity to learn how to deal with it, but it does not take away your pain. You learn when to mourn, when not to mourn. You learn not to let it show in public, because people get to the point they don't want to hear it. They don't want to go to your low spot. They have no desire to be where you are. You would go in places and you would see them point, that's the lady that lost her son. That went on for years. I'm going to say at least 3. You hated to go anywhere where you knew anybody. When I first went back to my church then, go in late, leave early. Nobody could ever speak to me. It was years before I would go in and stay. And they wanted to all pray for me and console me. I couldn't handle that. I could not handle that. So now we come to the point where we're ready, getting close to go to trial. I'm a well-known figure in our community, as I said before. Everybody knows everything. And I got thinking, I don't want to do this anymore. I don't want to do this. They had an ironclad case against this man. They were going to trial, and they were going for, I can't remember if it was 104 or 124 years. So I went to the prosecutor on a Friday. Our children played soccer together. I said, I want you to draw up a plea agreement. And he said, no way. He said, we're not doing that. I said, I want you to do that. He said, no way, Suzie. He said, we have a great case against this man. We're going to put him away. So I left his office thinking, I don't want to do this.
Tell me what was going on with you. What was your thinking behind asking for the plea agreement?
I didn't want my family to go through anymore. Every day anybody picks up the newspaper, that's Suzie Mack's kid. You worry about them trying to dig up things to make your child look bad. And there wasn't anything that I knew that they could do that on. He hadn't been in trouble, but I didn't want my name, I didn't want my son's name on the paper. I just didn't want that.
You didn't want to go through that.
I didn't want to go. I didn't want to put my family through it. My parents, I didn't want to put them through that. And I knew it would be long and drawn out. Who knows? Maybe fast. I don't know. But I'm figuring days in trial. I'm figuring everything in the paper, back on the news. I just didn't want that. And I just thought, I can't bring Jimmy back. It doesn't matter what I do. I cannot bring my son back. So the next week I went back to the prosecutor. And I said, I want a plea. And he told me, no way. And I said, this is what you do for me. You go home. I don't want your opinion. I want your wife's opinion. I said, you ask your wife, if this was your child, would she want to go through trial or would she want a plea? And I said, I'll come back Monday morning. I didn't have to go back. Monday morning he called me first thing and said, we'll plea. So he should have got 104, 124 years. We ended up settling for 75. In the state of Indiana, 1 year is 2. So he's going to serve 30-some years. I know he's going to get out of prison. I know that. I don't want any other mother to ever go through what I've went through, ever. It is terrible. And if they don't know Christ, their chances of making it are slim to none. It's just not going to be, it's not an easy road as it is. But if I didn't have any hope of Christ and seeing Jimmy someday, I can't imagine where I would be. Cannot imagine it. So we did the plea agreement. He's in prison. He's remorseful. He has sent me 1 letter. I have not been able to respond to that letter yet. The 2 Bible verses that God has given me is number 1, be still and know that I am God. In the midst of that, you have to trust that God knows what he's doing way better than you do. Or his thoughts are higher than ours, his ways are higher than ours. And the other Bible verse is Jeremiah 29:11. I know the plans that I have for you. I have hung on to those 2 verses. I hung on to them way before Jimmy was killed. And they're the only 2 verses that really sustain me yet today. Is I know beyond a shadow of a doubt God knows right where he's taken me. So I tried to keep busy. I did. I excelled in my work, but I worked all the time. You would find me at the office at 2 and 3 in the morning, and I sell real estate. You sure don't sell houses at the time. But I was working on future clients, everything I could do just to keep my brain busy. To this day, I have to keep my brain busy. If I let myself get to a position where I'm not busy, I'm in trouble. If I hear certain music, I'm in trouble. I have literally been someplace and saw somebody that I thought it was my son, and you would think I'm stalking them because you can't help it. If they're red curly hair and you get a glimpse, it's like, gosh, that looks like my son. I'm following them, taking pictures, trying to figure out how they look so close to Jimmy's look. It's kind of crazy, some of the stuff you do. And you have to ask yourself why you do it. There's no reason why you do some of the things you do, and you have to forgive yourself for doing those. But there's a dear friend, and his name is Jack Brady. And Jack, he teaches a lot of criminal classes at the college. And he had asked me multiple times if I would talk to the class. And I'd tell him no. I told him no so many times, but he was persistent. And finally, I remember one day he called me and I said, I'll do it. I'll talk to him. Just because I wanted Jack to quit asking me, if I'm honest, at that moment. So I went and I first talked to Youth for Christ, which was very hard. It doesn't matter where I go, I cry almost every single time. Can't help it. It's so real and still so, like it was yesterday. So from there, Jack asked me if I would be interested in speaking in the prisons. And at first I hesitated, but I've done that. And I now help facilitate a class in a prison. If you would have asked me 10 years ago if I would go speak to criminals, murderers, child molesters, rapists, drug dealers, burglars, I would have said there's no way. If you would have asked me if I had got up in front of groups of people and talked, I'd have said no way. But you never know what's going to happen in your life. You never know from one day to the next where God might have you and where God might use you. And in the Bible it says to go boldly. So even though it's hard, if God wants me to go, I go boldly and try to share. If I can prevent one mother, because the man that murdered my son is going to get out of prison. He served almost 10 years. He's got to serve 30. He's got time off for good behavior. If he takes classes, he gets less time. He's going to be out of prison. Now, he'll be a lot older, but I do not want him to get out of prison and hurt one more child or one more person where a mother has to lose their child. So if I can help, everybody says, Suzie, why do you put yourself through this? Why do you do this? You should just repress this and let it go. There's another mother out there who is either going through it or is going to go through it. It's going to happen. But if I can do one thing to help one person, then I know I've done what Christ wants me to do. I know that. Then I'll lead you with one last story. We have a golf scramble for my son every year, and we raise money. The money goes into a community foundation. We worked really, really hard. We have it so it's self-sufficient now. And our golf scramble will be coming up in June. And last year, you get all the golfers off in the carts. They take off, and then it's kind of like, whew, we got it going. So there was a bunch of us ladies sitting around the table where we have all the raffles, and this young man came up, and I knew that I should know him. But I couldn't place him. He wasn't one of my son's close friends, but I knew they went to school together. And he said, he just kept kind of him-hauling around. And finally I said, you need to talk to me? I said, are you wanting to talk to me? And he goes, I am. I said, well, let's set an appointment and we'll talk next week. And he just stood there. And he said, it's very important. I said, okay, let's take a walk. So we took a walk, and he's this big tall kid, and I'm not very tall. And he is weeping, just started crying. And he said, it's very hard for me to come tell you this. And I said, son, just spit it out. Just tell me. He goes, well, I don't know you well enough, and I don't know where you are with your faith. And I said, just tell me. And he turned and he said, I wanted to tell you this for a year, but I didn't want you to think I was crazy. And he said, Jimmy's in heaven. And I looked at him and I said, I know that. And he said, no, you don't understand. The night he was killed, I had a dream. And he goes, I wasn't living my life right at that time. And he said, in my dream, there was this huge stairwell, and this dark-headed man came down to the bottom of the stairs and got Jimmy. He said, but that's all I could remember for a long time. And he said, so this would have been 8 years after my son had passed, or serving the 9th, actually. And he said, you don't know, I've struggled to get my life right. And he goes, finally, I have my life right. And he said, I've had it right for 2 years. And he said, I've wanted to come to you, but I have prayed and prayed that God would allow me to remember the dream. And he said, God gave me the dream about a year ago. I just have had a hard time coming to you. And he said, when that man came down those stairs, that was Jesus. And he said, Jesus grabbed Jimmy's hand, and Jesus walked Jimmy up those stairs and opened the gates to heaven. I'm very fortunate that God has allowed me to have 3 confirmations that Jimmy's there. My goal would be to encourage every mother to forgive herself, number one, of maybe not always being the mom that you wish you had been, because I've went through that. Blaming myself, asking myself if I've been the best mom I should have been. So forgive yourself. Forgiveness is freedom. When we talk about forgiveness with the person that hurt or injured your family, you have to realize that that's a child of God, just like you are. The Bible says, come to me, or come to me all who are weary, and I will give you rest. Dennis is a child of God too. Dennis made a mistake. He was drunk. If we could go back and he was sober, he would have never shot my son. Would have never done it. They might have had an argument, but I don't believe for 1 minute he would have drove home and got a gun. The Bible says we have to forgive each other. Doesn't matter. It doesn't say in certain circumstances. It says forgive one another. And the second you forgive, you're free. Forgiveness is not necessarily for that person. Forgiveness is for you. Because when you forgive, God sets you free. There is a light at the end of the tunnel. If you don't have a relationship with the Lord, you need to seek Him, because He will help you get through it. You need to hold your head up high. You know, when I go to speak at prisons, the one thing that I ask them is, how many of you have asked God to forgive you for something? You look out there in the midst of however many, 75 to 100 of them, they all raise their hand. I will ask them, how many of you have asked Christ to give you for the same thing more than one time? They all raise their hand. The Bible says that when we ask for forgiveness, our slates are wiped clean. God's forgiven Dennis Roberson for killing my son. I have to forgive him too. And everybody needs to find a way to get that to happen, because they will be free. And until they forgive, they will never be free.
Did Dennis say anything in that letter that at least let you know that he was remorseful? You said he was, and did he give you any idea of why it happened?
No, he has not talked about what happened once. The letter was probably 4 pages long. I had a gentleman call me and ask me if I would be willing to receive a letter, because there's not supposed to be any communication. I thought it was somebody from the prison, but it was not. So I got this letter when I was not supposed to. All it really talks about is remorseful, how sorry he is, how he owes his life to me. When he gets out of prison, he'll do anything he can do to help me or my family members, because that's what he's supposed to do. I have not written him back yet, because my daughter is not on the same page as I am yet. She has not been able to forgive totally yet. God's working on her, but she's not there. And, you know, they've asked me if I want to meet him. I do now. They asked me that probably 2 or 3 years ago, and I couldn't because Kayla's not ready. But I think Kayla can handle that now. The only thing that I want from him, he feels indebted to me. The only thing that I want from him is for him to never hurt anybody else. There is nothing in the world he can do that can ever replace my son. Not the first dime, not $1 million, not $10 million, not mowing my yard for life. I don't want any of that. I just don't want him to hurt anybody else.
You said it was kind of supernatural. You didn't have maybe the same struggle with forgiveness that some people did. What do you attribute that to, Suzie?
I actually have to say it's 100% by the grace of God. I don't know how I didn't get angry. You know, one of the times I spoke in a prison, one of the prisoners said to me, "You never talk about being mad. You never said you were mad or you were angry." I had to go home and ask my friends, and I asked my parents, was I angry? Did I get angry? I was so grief-stricken. All I did was longed for my kid. I wanted him so bad to be alive. I know that Christ helped me not even to think about what happened. I didn't go there. I never went to all the bullets and Jimmy took. I didn't go through. Once in a while I'll ask myself, did he suffer long? You know, but God allowed me to keep my focus literally on my child. Now everybody asked me, well, one day when we went up to see the young man that was killed, I knew he was injured very, very badly. My daughter, my ex-husband, and I went and drove to see him at the hospital. He was lifelined out.
So he didn't die?
He did not die, no. He's alive today, yeah. And I can remember going in and he had gaping sores because they couldn't close them. He was on so many machines, it was scary to look at him, but I can remember walking up and leaning in his face and saying, I need you to be alive. I need you to make this for my son. I do remember that. I remember saying, you have to be alive to be Jimmy's voice. That's about the most I remember about being angry. At that moment, it was just right after, maybe 2 days after it happened. And it's been hard for that young man. That young man feels very guilty at times. Jimmy was actually supposed to have left 10 minutes earlier with the friend that he came with. This young man asked Jimmy to stay, and he would take him home or take him back to his car. If Jimmy wouldn't have stayed, you know, you ask yourself, what if? If Jimmy would have went home, you know, if he would have stayed at college, you know, the different changes that could have happened. The process of forgiveness is not easy for most people. I know that. And I know that because of everybody I talk to, they have no concept of how I can have forgiven this man. You know, people say, there's no way I'd forgive. You know, when I went to the hospital to see this man, or this young boy, there was somebody at the hospital that told me he was a dead man. And the only thing that came to my mind was I need to stay away from that person. I can't think like that person. There were so many kids angry that they would have done anything to do something to honor Jimmy. There are so many kids that have tattoos on their bodies of my son. Jimmy always had this saying that said, family first, friends second, and those that hate you dead last. A lot of people have that tattooed on their body somewhere, but forgiveness isn't easy. I could not have forgiven without God's help. It is that simple. I couldn't have done it on my own. I thank God all the time for being Him allowing me, I should say, to forgive, because I've met people in my situation. The prosecutor will call me once in a while and say, hey, this family's hurting, would you go talk to them? And if they don't know Christ, there is absolutely zero hope.
They are so struggling, so hurting, and so turmoiled. I can't bear to begin the pain that I would have went through if I didn't have God's help. There's no way I could have done it. I can't explain forgiveness. There's no way I can explain it.
Passes understanding, doesn't it?
Mm-hmm. It does. It's just way beyond me that I can forgive the man that actually took my son's life.
And you know that even people that do love God and have Christ in their life can take a longer process, like your daughter.
Mm-hmm.
Knowing that some people are going to take time and struggle. Talk a little bit about the process maybe that you've seen others go through.
I took her to counselors. We would go to one because I could see that she was going to be struggling. I didn't know what to do. And that was another hard thing that I realized. And the farther I get from the date of Jimmy's death, I have some regrets. My biggest regret, if I'm honest, is that I probably wasn't there for my daughter's emotional needs right after it happened because I wasn't capable of taking care of myself at that moment. So that my biggest regret is I maybe wasn't the strong one that she depended on or needed during that time. And I believe that God works with each one of us at a different level, at a different time, at a different place. And for some reason, I believe that God equipped me to be able to forgive because he has plans to use me to help other people. I never in a million years would have dreamed I would be sitting here talking to you. Not in a million years would I have. And I just know that I am the voice, or a voice for Christ to try to help hurting people. But not only to help the victims and their family. God has me talking to the people who have committed the crime to help them realize it's not poor me that you're in jail. It's not all about you sitting here. You have taken a life. You have put gaping holes in families' hearts. Some of their lives never, ever get repaired. They struggle and struggle and struggle, can't work. And this person has to take accountability for it. And they have to desire to change because a lot of them are going to be thrown right back out into our community. And if they're thrown out in our community without having changed, they're going to do it again. And then there's going to be other parents who are back where I was. And so God has a purpose for me. I haven't even figured it all out yet. But I know that I'm a voice for him at this point. Kayla's getting there. 10 years later, she's getting there. Her father, I'm not sure will ever get there. There was such anger. And I'm so grateful that I got to talk to my son that night because his dad hadn't talked to him in weeks. And I can't imagine how I would have felt if I hadn't been able to speak to him. But I was able to hear him say, "Mom, I love you," one last time. And I'm so grateful for that. Forgiveness isn't going to be easy for anybody. It's just not. You're going to struggle. But you don't want to live the rest of your life feeling the way you do if you have not forgiven. It's not worth it. It is not worth it. So my challenge to family members who have lost somebody, number one, you got to get with people who will help you. Seek a church. You have got to get up every single day, even when you don't feel like it, because you're going to feel like you don't have a purpose. Nobody needs me. I've lost everything. We kind of go in the poor me syndrome. And you have to fight that to get out of that. It's going to be an uphill battle. And there are days I struggle terribly.
You can say something to me. I have an agent that works for me in my office, and our sons were same age, same group. She'll come in and say, right after it happened, for the first 3 or 4 years, they were still pretty young. Most of them are getting married now, and it's a little different, but she would come in and say, oh, you know what the boys were doing? Not realizing that my boy was not doing it. You know, and she would come in and say all these fun things they were happening, and she'd walk out of my office and tears would flow down my face. Because it's like, what if? You know, what if he was still here? Would he be doing that today? You know, I still think that. You know, sometimes I'll see one of Jimmy's friends and I'll think, would Jimmy have kids? Would I be, you know, I wasn't just robbed of my son. I lost grandchildren. I lost one of my best friends. I lost probably a future caretaker of me when I'm old. I've lost a lot. And we as individuals have to fight daily to overcome this tragedy. Because if we don't work daily to overcome it, we will live in misery for the rest of my life. I made my mind up, I didn't want to be there. My joy was stolen from me that day. And I have prayed and prayed, Lord, bring my joy back. And the nice thing is, you look at all the traumas that I've been through, I feel like Job. In the Bible, Job had everything taken away from him. But I look back, I was single for 20 years. I'm now married for a year. I lost a son, but God gave me 4 grandchildren. I've got 2 sets of twins. God is restoring and bringing my joy back, one day at a time. And that's my hope for everybody that has lost somebody, is that they can get their joy back for the time frame of the rest of their life. There is life after death.
Man, I want to stand up and give you a standing ovation for that.
You don't need to do that.
It's beautiful. It's beautiful. What that last statement is so incredible, and what people need to hear, that there is hope and there is joy, as hard as it is. And other people can say it, but your story is real. It's tangible. Real. And people can't argue with that because you lived it.
Definitely. There were some pretty low moments, guys.
Oh, I know.
Pretty low moments. But
I mean, your description of how it felt and what it was like for you with that numbness, it's so accurate to what so many people feel, but they're not able to articulate as beautifully as you did, kind of paint that picture of the devastation of just having everything destroyed.
I don't know that I honestly paint it well, because it sucks. It is not a good place to be in.
It's hell.
It is. Yeah. You know, it's funny, I'll tell you one little story. The prosecutor asked me to go to this gentleman in Gas City. His daughter, I don't really know the story well, so I can't really talk about it, but she had let some people into the house and she was shot in the back of the head. And the police had done their duty and got the stuff out of the house, but the father went and picked up the shattered skull of his daughter piece by piece and put it in a baggie. And the prosecutor had called me and told me that he was really struggling and asked me if I would meet him there and or meet with him. So we had made arrangements. I was also told that this gentleman was rough, that I needed to be careful and I probably should take somebody with me. So I thought, okay, we're going to meet at some place common like Applebee's. So I made arrangements to do that. And I kept ringing in my ears, take somebody with you. And I thought, I can't. God says to go where you're supposed to go. And if I take somebody with me, it's going to look like I'm afraid.
Yeah.
3 hours before I was supposed to meet him, I was showing houses, and he calls me. And I said, are we still meeting? He goes, yeah, but you're going to meet me on my turf. And I said, okay. I said, Lord, I'm going to go. We met in a bar, a rough bar. And we went in, and we walked into a side room, and we sat at the table. He didn't know Christ. And he would blow, he smoked heavily, and it was coming right in my face. And I just started praying, Lord, I can't take the smoke. I don't even know if I should be here, but I'm going to ask that he sees your love. And I said, Lord, you got to keep smoke out of my face. He would come at me with hatred. I told my story so he could hear it. He would come at me with, I felt evil.
His smoke literally would come to the middle of the table and go up. Never came to my side of the table after I prayed. I would go at this gentleman with love. He would come back at me with hate. And I would continue to go at him with love, and he would come back at hate. And I just thought, Lord, you got to tell me what to say, because I have not a clue to say what to this man. I have no idea what I'm supposed to be saying to him. But if you're obedient, and if you listen to Christ, and you trust him that he will take you to places you're supposed to go, and he'll give you the words to say, it is his hand at work at that point.
Right.
It is his hand at work.
It's not you, it's him.
It's not me, it's him. And that's my whole goal, is that people see Christ, not me. I want them to see his love through me. That's my goal.
I know that they do. I see it. No question.
Yeah, that's
no
my
question.
that's my whole prayer. But going from that well, actually from home to here, from there to this building is, Lord, let them see you.
And he's giving you the ability to say this and tell the story in a way that's so powerful. Just
Thank
know
you.
that. Tell me, do any of those grandkids remind you of Jimmy?
Well, let me tell you. Let me tell you. My daughter named, when the twins came out, she had automatically said the one that's on the top is going to be Jimmy and the other one's going to be Jack. At the last minute, her husband tried to say, well, maybe we should name this. She goes, no, not changing them. The one that she named Jimmy looks like my son. She gave him his first name. The other boy has my son's middle name. He not only looks like him, he has his demeanor. He has, if they let his hair grow, he's got some curly hair. It's blonde instead of red, but he is a spitting image of my son.
What a beautiful gift.
It is. He's kind of growing out of some of it now, but when he was from like 1 and 2, the beginning stages of 3, it was like, oh my gosh, that's Jimmy made over. So they are my pride and my joy at this moment.
Thank you for sharing.
You're welcome. You're so welcome.
Can I give you a hug?
You can, most definitely.
Oh, you are such a precious lady.
Most definitely.
Bless you for what you're doing for people.
Thank you. Thank you very much.